Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
And a very good morning to you. This is Newsline, live from the Newsfirst studios in Dawson Street in Colombo. And on this wonderful morning, not long after a year of this Parliament, joining us as our guest this morning is Mr. Barbara Fonseca, the Senior Research Analyst at the CPA. Very good morning to you, Ms. Fonseca.
Good morning, Faraz.
Good morning, and thank you for coming here on time. Nice
You're very welcome.
Nice and early. So, I think my question to you would be, 1 year for this Parliament, 1.5 years nearly for the presidency. How fares the report card? What's the report card looking like?
Well, I would say there are certain improvements that this government has made, and especially talking about things like reconciliation and reform, there is some movement, and I think that needs to be recognized. But the potential of what this government could have done and the expectations were so high, the questions and there's a lot of disappointment in terms of delivery. So I think it depends on who you ask. But I am still cautiously optimistic that certain things can happen in the next couple of months. And I think we all need to be a bit more optimistic in terms of moving forward.
When you say there's a lot of disappointment, is that because, do you think, because the people got used to such a fast pace? There was a lot of development going on in the country, and so people were in a way complacent perhaps, but they were busy. The commercial world was busy. They had projects to do and businesses to run and people to manage, and the economy seemed to be going round. Is that why, do you think, that people think, well, they got us into the fast lane, and all of a sudden we're on the crawler lane?
I think, again, it depends on who you ask. Development comes at a cost. So if you saw the development in Colombo, for example, under the beautification, the urbanization, it wasn't just development and everything was okay. There were evictions that were happening. There were people who were losing their homes that they were living in for decades. So I'm not saying that was a perfect scenario, and there were huge issues in that sense. The disappointment I was talking about, if you talk to those who expected to be able to go back to their homes, to their lands, for example, in the north and east. You were talking earlier about going to Jaffna, and many have been displaced for decades. There was expectation they could all go back by now. There is disappointment in that. There's disappointment in terms of those who've been disappeared, the families searching for their missing loved ones. There's disappointment in terms of, can certain things that were promised in the January elections 2015, why have they not been delivered? Where is the new constitution that was promised? So there's disappointment in that respect. But I think if you look at what's happened in the last several months, since January, we've had the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, which is a huge step forward. We've got several independent commissions. We've got a Constitutional Council. A few months ago, we had the Right to Information Act. So there is progress as well. I'm not saying it's all bad. But I think a huge issue with this government is lack of communication. So we can sit here and talk about things that have happened, things that should be happening, and we're informed to some extent. But the government has miserably failed, I think, in communicating what is possible, what has happened,
and why it is that they're doing certain things. Right. But then, if we remember this, the man who's, I suppose, usually credited with being the most powerful on earth. I'm talking the President of the United States of America. I remember distinctly that when he came in the first time round, in that election, he said that he would dismantle Guantanamo Bay in his first 100 days. Well, he's had 2 terms. Guantanamo Bay is still there. And those people, the people held there, are being held in the most appalling, torturous conditions. And sometimes it doesn't match when we have an American tell us or question us as to what happened. What I'm trying to say really is, I'm not debating that, but what I'm trying to say is that even the most powerful man in the world made a promise and he was unable to deliver upon that promise. So in Sri Lanka we have lots of promises made and very hardly much delivery. The intent, as you say, is some hope, but how much of this delivery the people in the north, when we go there and we see, okay, we see new drains being cut or whatever, but how much of these changes, this talk of the Office of Missing Persons and so on, and accountability, reconciliation, how much of that matters to them as opposed to the practical things like schools and roads and housing and opportunity, which is...
Well, I'm not saying one is more important than the other. I think the socio-economic is very important for many people, as well as the civil political, and the realization of one's rights. So when you say north, again, that's a huge area, that's 5 districts.
Well, I think what I mean is that former conflict areas.
Which is the entire north. I would say in the sense of what they wanted is having respect, having the freedoms that everyone else enjoys, that everyone within the constitution is mandated to have. And during the war, there was a huge issue in those areas, the displacement, the devastation, the disappearances, all of that. Since January, at least, you've seen some lands being returned, and that's huge for many who've not been able to see their lands, to see their homes. And as recent as a couple of weeks ago, people have been going back and clearing lands. So there is some movement in that respect. But there's a lot more that needs to be done. And with the constitutional reforms, the reconciliation, there is that opportunity to realize some of those rights. Now, one of the differences in the last couple of months is that people actually have had a space to go and engage. If you look at the PRC process, in the north there were huge numbers that went and engaged and said, this is what we would like to see in a new constitution. With the consultation task force that's having sittings at the moment, again, there are lots of people coming out and saying what they want in terms of reconciliation. So there is, for the first time, a space for people to either engage or say, yes, this is what we want, or critique. Because we didn't have that space before where you could critique and assume you can be alive and not be white-wanned. I think that's a huge change, which we all need to recognize.
Absolutely. Well said.
But that said, the delivery has been very slow. Why haven't there been more lands that have been returned? Why has the constitution taken so long? Is anyone explaining why the government is taking so long with the commitments they made in 2015 in a whole spectrum of issues?
I think communication is absolutely deplorable. When they've been stuck with certain contracts for legal reasons, and you know, if it went the legal route, it would have been even more delays. But a simple thing like that, where we could have had a spokesperson for the ministry call a press conference. They call a press conference every blessed thing else, and they could have easily done that and said, listen chaps, this is what's happened. We've got a watertight contract. We can't get out of it. We'd love to take the contract away from them. We can't. So we decided to give the same company the contract, but we're going to be watching them, and they know we're going to be watching them. would have been far easier to do that than to let it be in the background and to fuel speculation and concern, thinking that there's something to hide.
Explaining also in all three languages.
In all three languages.
That's
it would
critical.
help, because it's no good. I was at the passport office, the old one, down Station Road, and chap was calling out the names, or the numbers in Sinhalese, and he was saying that you need to come over here and so on. There's a group of ladies there who obviously didn't understand this, and they didn't know, and they were getting a bit put out because actually some of them, their numbers had been called. But that was, I think this problem is now being in the new office. It's gone digital, so you've got a number and so on. But yes, the use of all the languages is essential. Talking about that, can you say to me, why is this Office of Missing Persons Bill Act, why did it cause such an uproar? Who's got what to hide?
That's a good question. I don't understand why it's made such a lot of noise when it's really having the same or similar powers to commissions of inquiry that we've had for decades, successive governments. So why is there such a nervousness with this Office of Missing Persons? And it's going back to, I think, the powers that it has and the lack of information in terms of what it is. It's very clearly stated in the legislation that was passed on the 11th of this month, where it's a very much an investigative body into missing and disappearances. Now, similar powers are there in the Human Rights Commission, in the Commissions of Inquiry. The most recent was the Paranagama Commission, the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission. I think is one of the most well-known in recent times. They had similar powers. So why is there such excitement with this? And that's a good question. Why is there? Because I don't understand why everyone has got so excited about something that will only address missing and disappearances issues. It can't do anything else other than investigate and give answers.
But in practical terms, how can any department, be the government or even provincial, say in the north, how can they help when people have been missing for several years? I mean, I suppose in some places where there's documentation, we may find out. But is there such documentation? How do they find these people?
So there's been several initiatives to investigate. I think the first is to look at what they have unearthed, and the most recent, as I mentioned before, the Paranagama Commission actually gave a report to the government, and that's a starting point. I think if there is a genuine, a credible investigation, there could be information at least as to what happened to some of the people who are disappeared or missing.
Let's discuss this after this short break. Do stay tuned to Newsline. We'll be right back after this short break.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
රාජකුමාරයෙක් වගේ කෙනෙක් ලැබෙන්න යන්නේ. ඔයා වෙන ලස්සන රටකට එක්කගෙන යයි.
මගේ විවාහය කොහොමද එයා තීරණය කරන්නේ? එයාගේ කසාදේ මං ඉන්නකම් වෙන්නේ නෑ.
මං මේ විවාහයට කොහෙත්ම කැමති නෑ.
ඒත් මම හිතන්නේ නැහැ ඔයාට ඒ තරම් ආත්ම විශ්වාසයක්වත් තියෙනවයි කියලා.
සරස්වතී චන්ද්‍ර සතියේ දිනවල රාත්‍රී 8:30ට
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
And welcome back to Newsline, where my guest this morning is Ms. Fonseca from the CPA. Thank you again for being on our program. Practically, how does this, how can the OMP find somebody? They come to you and say in 2000, in April 2000, my daughter was abducted by a group of men who I think was LTT. They spoke in Tamil. Okay.
So,
how do they find?
to be very clear, the OMP hasn't been set up. So
Right.
the first step is now
To set it
for
up.
the Speaker to sign,
Right.
certify the legislation, and for the office to be set up, and that means appointing the members, 7 members to the OMP, and getting actually the secretariat set up. So it's going to take a bit of time to make sure it's in place. And then to inform the people as much as possible, as widely as possible, what the OMP can do. Because there is very limited information in terms of whether this is another commission, whether this is done by the police, and I think it has to be very clearly
Do you
said.
think they have actually kept records, these people who've been abducted?
The
who's-
victims,
Yeah.
the people who
Well,
actually...
the people who are complaining probably have they have dates and places and times. But do you think the other side, whoever this other side may be, for example, did they find voluminous records of the LTT detailing all these people, they've abducted the children, etc., etc. So, from
I
an
can't-
investigator's point of view, I wouldn't know where to start.
I can't comment on whether there were records kept by alleged perpetrators,
Yeah.
and that's an investigation that needs to happen.
Yeah.
But I would say, starting from the testimony of the eyewitnesses, the family members, the victims, there is enough to start an investigation. There are instances, including in the courts, where some people have come and said they've had lists of people who've
Yeah.
been detained.
Yeah.
And I think those are information that's a starting point. But for the OMP to actually genuinely investigate, they have to start from pretty much scratch. They can't just rely on what's been
But Ms. Fonseca,
collected before.
But Ms. Fonseca, this is, I'm listening to you and I hear what you're saying and I'm thinking to myself, this thing's going to go on forever and a day and then another day. And we'll still be 10 years down the road or 20 years and the OMP will have smart offices and so on, hopefully. And you know, they may have branches all over the place. They may have branches in Warakapula and so on, where the JVP youth, so many went missing in those areas, or in Tangor, and we might have one in Jaffna and Point Pedro and wherever. We're all very nice. We're all linked and using Google Balloon, who knows. But at the end of the day, what's their delivery likely to be? Am I going to wait 10 years for closure? And what kind of closure? The Prime Minister saying they're probably dead. They're all dead. Is that closure?
Well, if he has the information, he also should come before the OMP and give that information. If there is information within the government that everyone who has not been accounted for is dead, and if that statement has anything to back it up, that has to go to the OMP. Now, about the time limit, there is no guarantee this is going to happen in 6 months or 1 year. It could take decades. It's taken decades in other countries.
Yeah.
In Guatemala, in Peru, in Argentina, that's gone for decades. But for family members,
What are they looking for? Are they looking for closure in terms of information? No, are they looking for
well,
compensation?
a lot of people who've gone before previous commissions in
Yeah.
public sittings have said, we want to know what happened.
Yeah.
It's a basic fundamental ask.
Yeah.
If someone in your family is disappeared,
Yeah.
you would know what
Of course.
you would want to know. You
Of
would
course.
ask the question.
Yeah.
So it's quite right that citizens of this country, regardless of the area, be it north, east, south, ask the question, and everything needs to be done to ensure those answers are given to them. Now, there is no guarantee that will happen in a short time. What can be done is to ensure the OMP is provided the resources it needs to ensure those investigations happen. So it's not just going and taking testimony or looking at case files. It's also having resources like forensics, tracing, ensuring there's a database set up so that there is some system, one system, and that's provided in the law.
What about compensation?
So the OMP can recommend to the existing authorities or any future authorities on reparations, on issuing certificates of absence or certificates of death. Those can happen too. But the OMP in itself doesn't have the mandate to give compensation or to give a death certificate. So it's reliant on the existing system as well. So it's reliant on the Attorney General taking a potential case to court. The OMP cannot do that. The OMP
When we listen to the report card, and one of the biggest drawbacks has been, or the non-delivery, has been the promise by this government to investigate and hold accountable the people credited with the excesses in the Rajapaksa years, for example, and that is so fraught with delay that when you mentioned to me the potential time frames,
the potential, I'm not saying...
Yes, of course, the potential time frames, and by nature it's going to be, they're not going to tap in a few buttons and say, oh yeah, well we know that your loved one was XYZ there. They're going to have to investigate everything, and I can envisage an investigation fraught with delays right from the word go. They're going to have to contact the army and wait God knows how long to be told that no, we don't have those records anyway.
Well, that is a potential scenario that it could take years. People may not give the information. But there are, I think, also cases where they might be able to find what happened, and possibly closure is possible. Now, I always find it interesting when people say there could be closure, because I don't think I can say what closure is.
Correct.
It's for each victim to go through a process to find out, and the OMP doesn't guarantee closure.
Yeah.
The OMP is, I think, one step in a long process. And it goes back to what the government has committed in 2015, which is many mechanisms, processes. So right to truth, right to justice, reparations, non-recurrence, all of that is important. OMP is just one small piece of the puzzle.
Is it all... I'm being very skeptical here. Is all of this being done just to, as some would say, to style it out? Yes, we've got an OMP. Yes, we've got RTI. Yes, yes, yes to everything. All these nice, they're not Western luxuries, but they're, they've been tried and so on.
I think there are credible criticism saying this is to pacify certain actors, including the international community.
Could it be part of, this is another bit of a skeptical part coming up, could it be all part of one more thing that will help us get GSP Plus back? Not 57 things.
Or it could be something where the government has committed in Geneva, in the UN Human Rights Council,
yes, that's right.
And it's checking a box.
Yeah.
Granted, there is that fear that it's just checking boxes.
And therefore, if that's the case, then all these victims whose lives are on hold, for want of a better word, our Government, the program, has revealed poverty across the nation. It is even in places that are just outside Colombo, but it's certainly far more pronounced in these in former conflict areas and in other areas too. So isn't it better, whilst you're having this, isn't it better to turbocharge and boost the programs that will help lift the people of the rural areas, their lot in life, to lift it up to some better standard?
I think it's a balance. You can't say having a road or having water or a functioning hospital is going to solve all the problems.
Yeah.
For those who've experienced violence, direct or indirect, there are many questions that need to be answered. There's the search for justice, there's search for reparations. So by giving a tarred road, it's not going to solve problems.
Yes, but by when somebody says to the Office of the Missing Persons, they'll say, well, you know, these guys, we think they were LTT, they came and they took my daughter away. This happened in 2001, let's say, I don't know. Who do you ask? Who's here? Who's there from the LTT? Can we get hold of KP? And he'll say, well, I only brought, you know, I was just the procurement manager.
There are a few within the still living who were in the former LTT. I think there can be questions asked.
Right.
Some of them had senior positions in the previous government.
Yeah.
Were they ever asked what happened?
Yeah.
It's not just the disappearances that happened during the last stage. There are cases of child abductions in the East, for example. And I think there are those alleged perpetrators still out there. Ask the questions. Not every case can be solved, granted. But there has to be a genuine effort to look into those cases, because it is someone's family member, it is someone's loved one. So while spearheading and pushing forward on the infrastructure, I think you need to also look at it in a holistic manner. You can't just say, it's like checking the boxes. I built 20 roads, I built 20 hospitals. That's not going to be sufficient for everyone. And again, it goes back to communicating, saying we're starting this process. We have to see where it goes. We can't jump the gun now and say, will it be a success or not? Let's give it that chance. But there is that potential. If there's not enough evidence, we may not be able to find certain people. But that process needs to happen. You can't go publicly and say everyone's dead. Because what's the process that's being done to give that
sounds
answer?
like the easy way out.
I think it's a very easy way out, and it's also very insensitive, elitist way of saying, sorry, it's done and dusted, let's move on.
You need to read up and check. Do your research on something called Asperger's syndrome. We might have answers, but that does, Asperger's syndrome or not, doesn't help the people who are looking for answers. Do you think this will be law? Do you think the Speaker will sign? There's so much of kolapang going on that there's now they're challenging this on some procedural matter. Surely procedure should be given down there, whereas matters of the heart and mind should be up there.
Well, I think there is a process to follow with any legislation, and that needs to follow. If there were problems in the process of enacting this legislation, that needs to be looked at. Definitely there's been an uproar in terms of what happened on the 11th of August in Parliament. And I'm not the one who can comment on what exactly happened. That needs to be asked by those who are in Parliament. So I really hope the legislation follows through and the office is set up. Because why are we delaying this very simple thing of trying to find answers? This is nothing else than finding answers, and this should be given a chance.
Well, Ms. Fonseca, thank you very much for being on Newsline, and we will all hope that the answers will emerge soon rather than later. Thank you very much for being on Newsline.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Newsline. We're here Monday through to Friday, 7 till 7:30 a.m. Do join us. We'll be asking and discussing the questions that appear to bother you. Thank you, take care, have a great week, and God bless.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.